Hello, this is Emma. The video is mainly about the issue of Taiwan and my opinions on democracy and freedom. I have my own position on it, but I'm not coming here to promote my country. China does have many shortcomings, just like every country in the world. Before discussing the question, we may need to know about the history first. The following part is the most detailed and objective video explaining the history of the Chinese Civil War I've ever seen.
This is the island of Taiwan. Its political situation is a bit complicated. A slightly oversimplified way of looking at it would be that Taiwan is either its own independent country or part of China. But the reason that's oversimplified is because Taiwan isn't a separatist movement. Taiwan doesn't want to secede from China because from Taiwan's perspective, they are China. Well, at least constitutionally anyway. Taiwan's official name is the Republic of China, whereas the country that's generally referred to as China is the People's Republic of China. To fully understand the situation, we need to go back to the end of the 19th century when the last imperial dynasty governed China, the Qing dynasty. The Qing dynasty encompassed all of what is modern-day China, Taiwan and Mongolia, as well as parts of several other bordering nations. In 1894 began the first Sino-Japanese War between the Qing dynasty and the Japanese Empire, which primarily took place in Korea and Taiwan. The war ended just 1 year later with a decisive Japanese victory, which resulted in the island of Taiwan being annexed to the Japanese Empire. In 1912, after millennia of imperial rule in China, the monarchy was overthrown and the first Chinese republic was established, the Republic of China. In 1917, Sun Yat-sen, generally considered the founder of the Republic of China, returned from exile to re-establish the republic. He revived his nationalist party under the name of Kuomintang. After help from the West was refused, assistance came from the Soviet Union. In exchange for their military assistance, they asked that the Kuomintang cooperate and ally with the much smaller Chinese Communist Party. The original right-leaning Kuomintang party, now led by Chiang Kai-shek, took control of Nanjing and declared it their capital. The Chiang nationalists sought to purge the communists among their ranks, and in April of 1927, in what became known as the Shanghai Massacre, thousands of communists were executed by nationalist forces. The execution of communists ended their alliance with the Soviet Union and led to the start of the Chinese Civil War between the nationalists and the communists. The war began in August of 1927 with the Nanchang Uprising and the founding of the Red Army, the army of the Communist Party with Mao Zedong as commander-in-chief. 4 years later, in 1931, with the Civil War still ongoing, the Empire of Japan sought to use the war as an opportunity to expand their sphere of influence by invading China. The Japanese Imperial Army invaded the east coast of China and occupied Manchuria, as well as other nearby lands. Many nationalists had called for a temporary truce with the communists to defend China against the Japanese. The Second Sino-Japanese War escalated as Japan pushed into the Chinese capital of Nanjing and massacred tens of thousands of civilians and soldiers. In 1941, with World War II ongoing, Japan carried out a surprise attack on Pearl Harbor. In August of 1945, the United States drops 2 atomic bombs on the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Just days later, the Japanese accepted the terms of the surrender. Part of the surrender agreement included that Japan returned sovereignty of all lands that they had gained through warfare. However, this didn't just include territory they had gained during World War II, this also included their annexations of Korea and Taiwan several decades earlier. So the island of Taiwan, taken from the Qing dynasty by Japan in 1895, was to be returned to China. After the war with Japan was over, the Chinese Civil War started up again in 1946. The nationalists and the communists only ever had a very loose alliance against the Japanese, and the fighting never completely stopped. The Soviet Union backed the communists, while the United States backed the nationalists in what were the early years of the Cold War. Despite having a superior number of soldiers and equipment, the Chinese Civil War was decisively won by the communists as they captured more and more land, pushing the nationalists further and further back until 1949 when the Kuomintang government retreated to the island of Taiwan. This effectively ended the Civil War, although no official peace treaty was ever signed. Later that year, the Communist Party proclaimed the People's Republic of China. Meanwhile, the Kuomintang government, the Republic of China, and the still internationally recognised government of China was exiled to the island of Taiwan. Over the course of the next few decades, international recognition began to shift from the Republic of China to the People's Republic of China, and in 1971, with UN General Assembly Resolution 2758, the People's Republic of China were recognized as the legitimate government of China. Although the United States had voted against the resolution, the US broke off diplomatic ties with the ROC in 1979. In 1992, the two governments met, coming to an agreement which was known as the 1992 Consensus. The consensus being that both sides adhere to the One China policy. The One China policy is the belief that there is only one China and that Taiwan is part of China. However, both sides see themselves as the legitimate government of China. Both sides of the Taiwan Strait agreed that Chinese unification was the eventual goal and that the current situation was only temporary.
The key point in the dispute is Japan returned Taiwan Island to the Republic of China, so the DDP is occupying the island under this name. 这就让我想起了反清复明天地会啊，历史总是惊人的相似。This is the first related video I found on YouTube. It was reposted by Taiwanese news media, and it has almost twice the amount of likes from previous video. Let's take a look.
In everything but name, Taiwan is an independent country. It has its own money, it has its own laws, it has its own army, it even has its own elections, which of course are not really allowed in China. After World War II, Taiwan was taken from Japan by the international community and given to China. So when Chinese people argue that Taiwan should revert back to Chinese control, what they're really saying is they want to go back in time to the brief 200 years in which Taiwan was actually controlled by them. But this doesn't really make sense. We can't really turn back history. Within that 200-year range, the United Kingdom had control of Australia, Canada, and the United States. Would it be reasonable for modern-day Britain to claim ownership of those three territories based on the fact that they owned them 200 years ago? No, it would be completely ridiculous. In conclusion, were Taiwan ever to be invaded by China, it wouldn't be the motherland reclaiming what's rightfully theirs, and it wouldn't be a grand reunification of some imaginary Chinese family. It would just be a large nation arbitrarily invading a smaller nation.
I think here's confusing the concept. The United Kingdom gave up its political control over these colonies because its national power was not enough to support the huge empire. But Taiwan was colonized by Japan and be returned to China. It's nothing about turning back to history. Instead, when the Communist Party won the ruling power of China and was recognized as the legitimate government, it meant that the Communist Party should take over all the territory under the Kuomintang at that time, including Taiwan Island. The situation may like, when Trump lost the election this year, he would lead his supporters to Hawaii Island and establish the Trump Kingdom. Sorry, I can't agree. Anyway, after understanding the relevant history, I still have a lot of questions. I think it's because of the Korean War. In October of 1950, the CPC sent 250,000 Chinese troops for helping the North Koreans, as well as defending the northeast border of China. At the same time, when Kuomintang evacuated to Taiwan, they took away a large amount of gold and valued goods from the treasury, which caused the country to be extremely poor when the Communist Party took over.
Before the 1990s, Taiwan had been a one-party state, with the Kuomintang Party as the government. In 1996, Taiwan had its first presidential election, although the Kuomintang stayed in power. However, in the year 2000, the Democratic Progressive Party were elected into government and today are the more dominant party, having won the 2016 election. The DPP do not agree with the One China policy and reject the 1992 consensus. They also do not support Chinese unification and strongly support the idea of a Taiwanese identity. The DPP believe that Taiwan already is its own independent country.
He proposed a special state-to-state relations theory and supported the Taiwan independence forces suppressed by the Kuomintang. He implemented educational reforms and controlled public opinion. The deterioration of the relationship between the two sides began with the former top leader of Taiwan. Since the publication of the middle school textbook, Taiwan Exploration led by Li Tenghui in 1997, the textbooks used by young Taiwanese have always maintained the order of Taiwan history, Chinese history, and world history. The status of Taiwan history is also changed from local to national. As the result, in the view of history of the students, Taiwan is separated from China. The textbook preaches the modernization of Taiwan is attributed to Japan's colonization. It also portrays mainland China as an image that threatens and suppresses Taiwan. In this case, the idiom ancient and modern Chinese and foreign countries is forbidden in textbooks. Chinese was replaced by Han, and all my country became China.
吴教授是一个让人家非常尊敬的学者，因为在台湾这样的氛围，要来对抗民进党他的台独史观，在学术界是要付出很大的代价的。甚至有很多学术界的学者，他会私底下私讯我说，他连在脸书上，我的脸书上按赞他都不敢，因为他怕他的戏里面会去肉搜他按赞，就表示说，哦，你是支持统派的。哦，你是反台独的，那对他的学术前途会有很大的影响。
I once heard an aunt from Taiwan said, 台湾本来就是中国的啊，只是现在在台湾不能这么说。What's more, the media of Taiwan, known as press freedom, often discredit mainland China. Ordinary people live in a secondary communication environment.So our opinions are naturally influenced by the media. According to the chart, we can see those measures have greatly reduced the Chinese identity of Taiwanese. The information about Taiwan received by the 60s and 70s in China was, we should liberate Taiwan because our compatriots are still living in hell, which is not real. About the 80s and 90s, it was Taiwan, a beautiful and rich island, is the largest island in our country. With the intensification of the contradictions, mainland Chinese people are losing favor with Taiwan. If someone mentions Taiwan recently, it can only remind me of the territorial disputes. In fact, Taiwan has all the elements that a country should have. But when it comes to national sovereignty, the CPC will never make concessions. Maintaining the status quo seems to be the most peaceful solution. Therefore, some people say it is an established fact that Taiwan is a country, and say Beijing relies on international influence to suppress Taiwan, or even say China wants to invade Taiwan. But I think it doesn't make any sense after knowing the development of cross-strait relations from ancient times. This problem may also be simple. One day, when China ranks among the developed countries, when Taiwanese discover that the welfare and benefits of being a Chinese are far greater than independence, I think the situation will not be as severe as it is now. It is imperialism. From the Opium War to the Sino-Japanese War, then to the 8-power Allied forces, we are still cleaning up the mess of the British and Japanese aggression until 100 years later. The invaders are no longer responsible for it, and even this endgame is used by the US as a bargaining chip to counterbalance China now.
现在将联合王国国旗和香港旗升中华人民共和国国旗和香港特别行政区区旗。
Since Taiwan is mentioned, Hong Kong must also be mentioned. The issue of Hong Kong is much simpler. In 1997, the British government returned it to the People's Republic of China. The system of one country, two systems can be maintained for 50 years. It is based on one country, and the purpose is transition. The young people in Hong Kong who are now protesting do not accept the one country, but they demand the government to operate the two systems by Western standards. Unreasonable. Hong Kong belongs to the People's Republic of China indisputably, as well as Macau and Tibet. Many people are unwilling to reunify because they think there is no democracy, freedom, and human rights in China. But please think about it deeply. Is public opinion really the opinions of people? We build our knowledge of the world and ourselves through the information we have received. Haven't our thoughts been affected by any capital? Some people in capitalist countries think the government is their steward. If the government doesn't do it well, people have the right to vote for other suitable candidates. But we can see that Trump has ideologically suppressed China and rejected Chinese production and culture. He took the toughest measures against China as campaign advantage. Is it aimed at ordinary people? I don't think so. I think it is to win over local capital which has been damaged by Chinese companies. In my opinion, they are like the robots in science fiction movies. You think they are doing the service, but you will finally realize that you are controlled by them. China is different. We know we are being monitored from beginning to end. And what are human rights exactly? Still remember the countries accused by the West for not having human rights? They may not have human rights before, but now they have no human lives. If I were to give up my existing peaceful life for this kind of freedom and democracy, I would not be willing. Unexpectedly, the highly inclusive world cannot accept there is a country in the East, and it's different from the Western mainstream. You can dislike or disagree with it, but it doesn't mean that it must be wrong.
And because the world can never have one model. If the world has only one correct model, the world is too boring.
Internet freedom is a popular topic recently. China banned Facebook because of the Urumqi 5th of July incident. Facebook ignored the Chinese government's request to dissolve related groups which incite violence. The ban was later criticized by Western media. There is no freedom of speech in China. Today, the US is trying to ban Chinese internet and software simply because they think those companies endanger their national security. What the United States wants is not internet freedom, but internet monopoly. It seems the video on Daily Issue last year is still making sense.
And because the Chinese company is Chinese, many governments don't trust how secure it's going to be. Imagine that. If Huawei becomes the leading 5G provider in the world, then China can spy on everyone, which is terrible, because that's what America wants to do. Yeah, and I know you're judging, well, if America wants to do it, then how do they judge it? That's not the point, right? You want to do it first. It's like when you cut someone off in traffic and then someone else cuts in front of you, you're like, hey, asshole, that was my move!
Anyway, China without the war cannot get Ali, Tencent, Baidu, and ByteDance. And this war can only block those who don't really want to use those services. So, good job, Trump. Welcome to learn the successful experience from China. What saddens me most is that globalization has been dismantled. As the result, radical nationalism in China is also on the rise. I think it's dangerous. Actually, the WeChat ban was recently rejected by California court. Fine, at least in the US, it's easier to sue the federal government. I am an idealist. I hope the world is peaceful, and we Chinese can see, know about, choose, think, and express more in a safe environment. Okay, the above are all my gibberish. As an ordinary person, I know nothing. I don't even know if I live in a real world or Truman Show. 天黑，请闭眼。If you are interested in China, Welcome to explore the real one by yourself.